Hey there. Tonight, we'll be exploring the quietly strange story of the Victorian bedroom, a room with purpose and protocol. It's a tale filled with misunderstood traditions, rigid routines, and more than a few uncomfortable beds, all wrapped in lace, dust, and peculiar charm. Before we begin, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do here. And in the comments, let me know where you're watching from, and what time it is as you're drifting off. It's always lovely to see who's joining from around the world now. Take a slow, deep breath, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft, steady hum, and let's gently ease into tonight's sleepy little corner of history. Imagine a soft knock at a wooden door. A cold brass knob waits in your hand. Beyond it, dim light filters through heavy, drawn curtains. The air is still, and the scent is faintly floral. Lavender oil dabbed carefully onto a linen sachet tucked into a drawer. You step inside. The Victorian bedroom was not simply a place to collapse into after a long day. It was a structured space, deeply tied to etiquette, gender roles, and class expectations. To lie down here wasn't just to rest. It was to behave. In wealthier households, bedrooms weren't even necessarily private. There might be servants coming in and out at dawn and dusk to stoke the fire, fetch the water, or draw the curtains. There was ceremony in every movement, folding the coverlet just so, tucking the sheets in neatly, placing the slippers exactly beside the nightstand. A maid might warm the bed before the lady ever entered it. For the poor, privacy was a luxury. In many cramped homes, the bedroom wasn't even its own room, just a curtained-off corner shared by multiple people. Sometimes entire families, parents, children, even boarders, might sleep side by side in a single bed. Not because it was intimate, but because it was cold. And oh, the cold. Most Victorian homes lacked central heating. The fire in the bedroom, if you had one, might be nothing more than a small coal grate, puffing out a little warmth before it was snuffed for the night. Otherwise, people relied on thick wool blankets, feather beds, and warming pans, long-handled metal, tools filled with hot coals, slid between the sheets to chase the chill away. Some even used bricks heated in the oven, wrapped in cloth. Furniture spoke quietly but firmly of class. In wealthier homes, beds were grand four-posters, with carved wood and heavy drapes, not only for warmth but for status. These bed curtains, known as bed hangings, could be drawn shut, not just to trap heat, but to provide privacy from servants or siblings or visiting relatives. The drapes swayed softly as the house groaned under the weight of winter wind. The walls might be papered in florals or stripes, delicate and pastel, while poor homes saw bare wood, or perhaps layers of newspapers used for insulation. Floors were wooden, sometimes covered in rugs or carpet scraps. Windows were shuttered or layered in thick fabric to keep out drafts. Even something as simple as a mirror, a polished glass oval above a small washstand, would only appear in homes and updot. Everything had a place. A jug and basin on a side table for washing. A chamber pot tucked discreetly under the bed. A Bible or prayer book on the nightstand. Perhaps a lock of a child's hair saved in a ribboned box. These quiet items whispered memories to no one in particular and waited patiently in the stillness. Nighttime was quiet in a way modern cities barely remember. There were no humming appliances, no glowing blue screens, no sudden ringtones in the dark. The only sounds were the creak of timber, the wind outside, the occasional snap of cooling iron. Footsteps of someone 2 rooms away might be clearly heard in the night. Clocks ticked. Floorboards sighed. The bed itself was different too. Many Victorian beds were shorter, not because people were shorter, but because it was considered unhealthy to sleep lying fully flat. They often propped themselves slightly upright, believing it aided digestion and prevented illness. Beds weren't soft by modern standards, either stuffed with straw, horsehair, or feathers. They could feel firm and uneven. The better the fill, the warmer the sleep. And of course, the ritual of getting ready for bed took time. Candles had to be snuffed or watched carefully. Embers needed stoking. Nightclothes had to be changed into, carefully hung or folded for morning. Prayer might be spoken aloud or silently. Slippers tucked neatly beside the frame. Hair unpinned or braided, depending on the woman's station. Even silence was structured. Children were taught to go to bed quietly. Talking in the bedroom was discouraged unless necessary. It was a room for rest, reflection, and sometimes for keeping secrets. There's something strangely comforting about the predictability of it all. The soft layers, the order, the dim glow of a dying fire. Even discomfort had its rhythm. The chill, the creak, the scratch of wool on skin. It was all expected, known now as we lie here with them, quietly, gently. We might imagine what it felt like to blow out the candle, tuck ourselves beneath heavy blankets, and let the sounds of the old wooden house wrap around us like a lullaby. So let your body settle. Take a long, slow breath. Picture the chamber pot safely under the bed, the slippers neatly placed, the ticking clock beside you. You are inside, a room where time moves more slowly, where sleep came not from silence, but from ritual, from routine, from surrender, and we've only just begun. The Victorian bed was not simply a piece of furniture. It was a structure, a small world in itself. And for many, it was the most elaborate, most symbolic, and most private item in the home. It stood as a centerpiece, not just physically, but socially and emotionally. Everything about the bed, from its carvings to its coverings, carried meaning. And in a time when modesty, privacy, and ritual governed daily life, the bed became a sort of temple, not only to sleep, but to everything that surrounded it. Birth, illness, intimacy, even death. Imagine approaching one now, the kind found in a middle-class Victorian home. It towers above you, for tall, turned wooden posts rise from each corner. They're often made from dark mahogany or polished walnut, gleaming faintly in the candlelight. Draped from these posts are thick curtains, sometimes velvet, sometimes brocade, sometimes a simple wool or damask. These bed hangings could be tied back during the day, then drawn closed at night, turning the bed into a sort of cozy, curtained cave. These weren't only for decoration. Victorian homes were drafty, often cold, and the idea of enclosing the bed was both practical and psychological. Behind drawn curtains, the sleeper could feel cocooned, cut off from the outside world, from wandering eyes, from the unsettling sounds of the night. Inside was your own breath, your own heartbeat, and the soft, muffled creak of the mattress below you. Canopies often crowned the beds, either as hardwood frames or softer fabric domes, giving the impression of height and grandeur. They weren't exclusive to the wealthy, though the poorest homes rarely had space or materials for such ornamentation. Still, even simple beds in modest homes sometimes had a valance or some kind of drapery above sewn by hand, reused from other fabrics or inherited from older generations. The mattress itself varied widely. For the rich, Mattresses might be layered, a feather mattress atop a wool one, beneath a soft ticking of linen or cotton. For others, it could be horsehair, straw, or old rags stitched together. Some beds had ropes strung beneath the mattress. Instead of slats, you had to tighten them periodically to keep the bed firm. This is where the old phrase, "sleep tight," comes from. Pillows were not standardized. Some families shared them. Others had special bolster pillows, long and cylindrical, which served both as support and decoration. A person might sleep with one pillow under the head and another clasped to the chest, depending on what they believed was healthiest or most proper. The sheets were tucked so tightly you could barely shift beneath them. And then came layers. First the top sheet, then the blankets, often wool, then a counterpane, which was a kind of decorative cover. Finally, if you were lucky and it was especially cold, a coverlet or eiderdown filled with feathers and stitched into ornate patterns. And yet, for all the care and heaviness of these beds, they weren't always comfortable. Mattresses sagged, blankets scratched, pillows flattened. Bugs, especially in the homes of the poor, were common. Bed bugs, fleas, and lice lurked in the corners and seams. People sometimes scattered herbs like lavender or pennyroyal into the bedding to repel them, or used smoke to fumigate the rooms of practice. That smelled as bad as it sounds. The structure of the bed also revealed its purpose. For children, beds were small and placed close together, sometimes in the same room as the parents, sometimes in separate rooms or nurseries, depending on class and house size. In wealthier homes, the master and mistress of the house might sleep in separate bedrooms entirely, visiting one another only occasionally in the quiet of night. Even guest beds had a specific etiquette. If you were visiting someone's home and given a guest room, you were expected to treat it with great respect, removing your shoes, placing your garments carefully, and thanking your hosts afterward. The bed might be aired out for days before your arrival and dressed in special linens just for you. Death too often came in the bed. There was a phrase, "dying in one's own bed," that held meaning and comfort in Victorian society. A person who died at home, in the bed they had lived in, was seen as passing peacefully, surrounded by family and faith. In some homes, the bed was also the place of birth, of recovery from illness, of whispered secrets and quiet grief. Beds were handed down. A couple might sleep in the same frame as their parents or grandparents, and while it might groan or sag, or bear the odd scorch mark from a candle held too close, it held the weight of history, of family, quite literally. Some beds even featured engravings, monograms, or dates carved into the posts, like silent guardians of those who had slept there before. You can imagine the slow wear of fingers tracing those lines over decades, half-consciously during quiet mornings or sleepless nights. To lie in a Victorian bed was to become part of a ritual, to climb beneath layers of time and tuck yourself into a rhythm shaped by generations. So now, imagine the feel of the blankets, rough at first, but warming quickly. The smell of wood and dust, and maybe old lavender. The creak of the mattress as you shift slightly. The way the bed curtains flutter ever so faintly from a draft you can't quite locate. And somewhere nearby, a fire settles. A candle gutters. Someone sighs softly in another room. You're not alone, not really. You are simply another sleeper. In a long line of sleepers. In a bed that remembers. The soft light of evening has settled across the room. A flickering candle casts long shadows on the wallpaper, and the fire in the grate lets out a gentle sigh. Before sleep, There was ritual, not rushed, not modern, just slow, predictable, and necessary. Cleanliness in the Victorian era was a matter of effort, not convenience. There were no taps, no hot running water. Everything had to be brought in. A pitcher filled from the kitchen pump, warmed over a fire, then carried upstairs. It was poured into a porcelain or enamel basin, which sat waiting on a wooden washstand, often covered by a lace doily or a piece of monogrammed linen. This was how one washed before bed, not in a tub, not in a shower, but standing at a basin, with a cloth and patience. You might start with your face, dabbing gently, wiping away the soot of the day, the residue of coal smoke, the faint sheen of sweat, behind the ears, down the neck, over the wrists. Feet might be wiped, especially in summer, though they would likely be cold already. Soap was hard, not liquid, often made from animal fat or lye. It came in solid bars that sat in tiny dishes with carved ridges to keep them from sticking. The scent depended on the household. Some had plain soap, no more than white chunks. Others, more refined homes, used rosewater or lavender-scented blends, stored carefully in carved boxes or wrapped in cloth. Towels were rough, woven linen, faded from years of use, often embroidered with initials, not for beauty, but for practicality, to keep them sorted. The rubbing dry was brisk, maybe a little scratchy, but warming, too. A little circulation to the skin before bed. For women, the hair had to be unpinned. Dozens of hairpins, carefully placed throughout the day, were removed one by one. The hair fell in waves, thick or thin, over nightgowns and shoulders. It might be brushed 50 strokes or more with a boar bristle brush, not for glamour, but for health. It was believed brushing cleaned the scalp, distributed oils, and kept illness at bay. The room would be quiet during all this. Maybe a sibling or spouse moved around you. Maybe the wind whistled against the shutter. But the washing was done in silence, mostly. Everyone knew the order of things. The pitcher poured, the towel lifted, the cloth wrung out, water tipped into the chamber pot afterward, or back into the jug if it had cooled clean. Ah, yes. The chamber pot, an object both useful and unspoken. Almost every Victorian bedroom had one, even among the wealthier classes. Indoor plumbing was rare and limited. So the chamber pot, a rounded porcelain or metal vessel with a lid, sat quietly under the bed, behind a curtain, or in a bedside cabinet designed just to hide it. Some were plain, purely functional. Others were decorated with blue patterns, floral motifs, or even small painted phrases, but no one admired them. They were simply necessary. Before bed, the chamber pot was checked, empty and in place. In the night, it was used if needed. There were no hallway lights, no safe stairs down to the outhouse. Just darkness, maybe a flickering candle if you dared. You would sit quietly, the cold porcelain against your skin, then return under the covers and hope to fall asleep quickly. In the morning, servants or children in poorer homes emptied it, washed it, dried it, and placed it back as if it had never been used. Teeth cleaning, too, was done in a primitive way. Toothbrushes were made with bone or wood handles, the bristles animal hair. Powders were used in place of paste, chalk, charcoal, or even ground shells. A small tin or jar might sit on the washstand, opened carefully, dabbed with a damp brush. The taste was strange, bitter or salty, depending on what it was made from. But it was what they had. All of this washing, brushing, changing into night clothes took time, but it was accepted. There was no rushing. It was just the way things were. The last act before bed was often prayer, spoken softly, from memory, kneeling beside the bed, hands folded, eyes closed, or perhaps just whispered under the covers, a comfort more than a creed. "Now I lay me down to sleep" was common for children. Adults might speak words of gratitude or ask for protection through the night. Then came the moment of blowing out the candle, a simple breath, and the room faded to shadows. Only the embers in the grate remained, glowing like quiet stars across the floorboards. The covers were heavy, layered wool and cotton, sometimes too warm, sometimes not warm enough. But you tucked in, turned on your side, and tried not to think too hard. Outside the window, the streets were still. Inside the walls, all was settled. No buzzing lights, no traffic sounds, no electric hum, just breathing, just night, and maybe, somewhere in the distance, the bark of a dog or the low whistle of wind through a cracked window pane. It was a different kind of clean, a different kind of peace. So tonight, as you lie in your own room, consider the rhythm of those simpler, slower evenings. A jug of water, a single towel, and a few soft strokes of a brush. You are warm, you are still, you are part of a quiet tradition that has long since faded, but maybe not entirely. In the quiet hours of the evening, when the final embers had burned low and the sounds of the street gave way to silence, the people of Victorian England slipped out of their day's armor, the corsets, the starched collars, the tightly buttoned layers, and into something softer, looser, gentler. Sleepwear was not just a matter of comfort. It was a reflection of propriety, class, and restraint, even in the most private hours. For women, the nightgown was the centerpiece of evening dress. These garments were usually made of white cotton or linen, cool in summer, warmer when layered for winter, and often hung loosely from the shoulders to the ankles. There were long sleeves in cooler seasons, trimmed with simple lace or delicate embroidery around the cuffs and neckline. Even in sleep, a certain modesty had to be maintained. The shape was flowing, designed not to cling, but to hover gently around the body. And while they may appear plain to us now, a closer look would reveal care hand-stitched pleats at the chest, a ribbon woven through the neckline, or a monogram embroidered subtly over the heart. A woman might have one or two nightgowns, passed down or carefully preserved, washed and hung out to dry by sunlight alone in wealthier homes. Sleepwear might be scented, stored with lavender sachets or rose petal sachets, tucked between folds. There were even nighttime caps made of muslin or lace to keep the hair in place while sleeping, especially for women who had taken the time to brush and braid their hair for health. And yet, beneath the elegance was a practical truth. These gowns weren't particularly warm. That's why women often added layers, a shawl or bed jacket, sometimes even petticoats beneath, especially in colder months. The chill of an unheated bedroom could settle into the bones by morning, and so, even at rest, a Victorian woman prepared for discomfort. For men, the nightshirt ruled. This was not so different from the women's gown, in shape, long, straight, typically falling to the knees or calves. It was buttoned loosely at the chest, often collarless and made of cotton or flannel. The color was usually white, but some had pinstripes, pale blue patterns, or even embroidery along the placket. On colder nights, a man might wear a bedrobe over his nightshirt, heavier and made of wool or quilted cotton. And then, of course, the famous nightcap, a long, pointed hat with a tassel at the end, worn not for style but for warmth. It might look comical to us now, but for those who slept in unheated rooms with stone floors and drafty windows, that little extra bit of insulation around the ears was no laughing matter. Children had their own versions of these garments, smaller, simpler, but just as layered. In families of modest means, siblings might share sleepwear, passing it down from one child to the next. Clothes were precious. They were mended and reused until the fabric itself gave out. Nothing was wasted. Even patches were patched. Shoes were left at the bedside, replaced with soft slippers or bare feet if you dared. But the floorboards were cold, so many kept a pair of socks or stockings on. Woolen bed socks were common, sometimes hand-knitted by a mother or aunt during the long, dark months of winter in wealthier circles. There were even distinctions between night dress and morning dress, the latter being what one wore briefly upon rising, before changing into daytime clothing. These morning garments were light robes or wrappers, often floral and flowing, worn while brushing the hair, writing letters, or taking tea in the bedroom. A woman might never be seen in her nightgown by anyone but her closest family, and even then, not without her wrapper over it. The idea of lounging in sleepwear, as we do today, would have seemed improper to many Victorians. Bedrooms were private. Dressing gowns were for transitioning. Sleepwear was for sleep. Not for wandering about or relaxing in the parlor, but sleepwear still had its quiet moments of elegance. A ribbon sewn to the collar, a stitched border on a sleeve, a tiny button made of mother-of pearl. These were small luxuries in a life that often demanded formality even in fatigue. They were gestures of care, glimpses of beauty tucked into the folds of utility. And when bedtime arrived, and the last lamp was extinguished, these garments, loose, breathable, light, became part of the ritual of release. They marked the shift from duty to rest, from noise to stillness. Imagine slipping into one now, the cool cotton settling against your skin, the faint scent of dried lavender rising from the fabric, the soft rustle as you adjust your shoulders. Beneath it, a shawl wraps around your arms. A nightcap is tugged gently over your brow. The world outside disappears. This, then, was the last layer of the day, not just on the body, but over the soul. A layer that signaled, enough. The chores are done. The prayers have been said. The water is poured out. The candle is low. Now, lie down. Feel the nightgown smooth against your legs. Let the nightshirt fall round your knees. Let your arms sink into the pillow's embrace and drift. Just drift. If we were to walk quietly through a Victorian home in the stillness of night, candle in hand, footsteps muffled by old rugs, we'd discover that sleep was not just a personal act, but a deeply structured one. Who slept where, and with whom, was no accident. It was all shaped by custom, status, gender, and space. In the grander townhouses and country homes of the upper class, bedrooms were spread across multiple floors. The master of the house often had his own chamber. The mistress, too. These were not necessarily signs of marital distance, but rather of wealth and propriety, you see. Intimacy was private, a thing not spoken of openly. Husbands and wives might visit each other's rooms when appropriate, but having separate bedrooms was common, especially if they could afford the space and the servants to maintain it. Each of these chambers reflected its owner's role. The husband's bedroom might include a writing desk, shelves of books, or the scent of pipe smoke. The wife's room was often softer, filled with sewing tools, perfumes, or letters in neat stacks tied with ribbon. There was a gentle femininity in the furnishings, floral patterns, cushions, lighter drapery, still elegant, still restrained, but distinct. In middle-class homes, the division was not always possible. The master bedroom often housed the married couple together, though it remained a formal space. Even in marriage, modesty was expected. Undressing might be done behind a screen. Servants entered at set times. Doors were closed firmly at night. Now we move down the hallway. To the children in many households, children shared rooms with their siblings, sometimes same gender, sometimes mixed, depending on space. The rooms were simpler, fewer decorations, a plain wooden bed, a chest for toys or clothing, a single candle stub on the nightstand. There was little privacy, especially in homes with many children. Beds were shared. Boys might whisper until they fell asleep. Girls might brush each other's hair or read quietly from a worn storybook. It was a childhood defined by closeness. Closeness of bodies, of breath, of warmth beneath shared blankets. And in poor families, that closeness became something else. Entirely in single-room homes, tiny flats, workmen's cottages, or back-alley lodgings, the bed was a communal object. Parents, children, and even visiting relatives might sleep together, not from sentimentality, but from necessity. The body heat of one was needed by the next. There was no fireplace, just wool, just limbs intertwined beneath old quilts. In these households, modesty blurred. Privacy was rare. The concept of my room did not exist. The entire house was the bedroom, and still sleep came, somehow, in the breathing, in the murmuring of dreams. Back in larger homes, we find other bedrooms too, rooms not meant for family, but for function. The guest bedroom, it was a mark of pride to have one, to be able to offer a friend or distant cousin a room of their own, with a fresh pitcher of water and a neatly made bed. Sheets laundered, a tiny tray with biscuits, curtains tied back just so. Even here, care was shown. And then, the servants. Their bedrooms were always smaller, tucked into upper floors or basements, sometimes just narrow attics with slanted ceilings and single beds. A servant might sleep alone or with others, depending on the household size. Their rooms were plain, functional, often cold, but they were theirs. A maid might rise before the sun to light fires or draw baths. A footman might be up late waiting for guests to return. The servants' sleep schedule was shaped by the household's needs. Their rooms were not places of leisure, but brief respites, places to collapse, to breathe, to gather strength for the day ahead. And still, in each room, there were traces of self. A book tucked under a pillow, a small cross above the bed, a locket hidden in a drawer. Even the simplest bed becomes a world when we fill it with memory. There were also boarding houses, common among working women or traveling men. These offered rented rooms, often with shared washrooms. Rules were strict. Quiet was enforced. And yet, for many, it was the first time they had a room of their own, a place where they could decide when to snuff the candle, when to pull the blanket higher, when to let go of the day. Even in institutions, orphanages, asylums, workhouses, sleep was governed by structure, rows of beds, bells, signaling bedtime, uniformity in clothing, in position, in silence, not comfort, perhaps, but order. And in that order, some found rest. where you slept revealed who you were. A bed in the center of a room. You were a child, sharing with siblings. A four-poster bed with silk hangings. You were privileged. A straw mattress behind a curtain in the kitchen. You were a maid. A narrow cot beneath the rafters. A writer, perhaps, or a dreamer. But no matter the room, or the class, or the noise outside, the act of lying down was universal. The closing of eyes, the stilling of breath, the long, slow drift into something quieter. Now, imagine walking through such a house. Room by room, each bed waiting, each pillow fluffed or flattened, each blanket folded or tangled. Where would you sleep? Would it be the curtained bed, with the fire burning low, the attic cut with the wind rattling the pane, the childhood mattress, soft and worn, with whispers echoing in the dark? Wherever it is, you are welcome there. Close the door behind you. Let the protocol fall away, and rest. Night had its own music in Victorian England. It wasn't the sharp, mechanical buzz of modern cities. No cars, no electric hum, no glow of neon or the ping of notifications. No night in the 19th century was a living thing. It breathed, through walls, shifted floorboards, whispered through cracks in the window frames. It came slowly, gently, like an old shawl pulled across the shoulders of the house. Imagine, if you will, lying back beneath layers of thick wool and crisp cotton, in a bed that creaks when you settle just so. The fire in the grate is low now, just embers, red and orange, cracking softly as they die. They don't scream, they whisper. Each pop and shift of ash is a voice in the silence. Not disruptive, but steady, predictable, comforting. You might hear it in the distance first. The slow, deliberate footsteps of someone padding down the hall, slippers on wooden floors, a maid extinguishing the final lamps, or a child seeking a parent's reassurance in the dark, and then quiet again. The bedroom windows, often shuttered or curtained against the cold, were not perfectly sealed. You could hear the outside, the wind moaning around the corners of the house, brushing against the panes with long, icy fingers. Sometimes it would whistle, sometimes it would howl. But mostly, inside, rain might tap like fingertips on the roof above, or drum steadily on the glass, lulling you with its rhythm. No rush, no violence, just a gentle reminder of the world continuing, even while you sleep. Some homes, especially in towns, might hear the clatter of horse hooves on cobblestone, distant, fading, rhythmic. A carriage making its way home through narrow lanes, the lantern on its side bobbing in time with the wheels. In the country, the night spoke differently. An owl calling once, far off in the dark. A dog barking, then silenced. Crickets when it was warm. The lowing of cattle or the soft stir of hay in the barn. But even in towns, the deeper stillness held its own charm. You might hear the church bell mark the hour once, twice, 3 times, depending on when you woke or how long you lay in half sleep, and within the home itself, the house would speak. Houses of the Victorian age weren't built for silence. They lived. Floorboards expanded and shrank with the temperature. Pipes moaned when water passed through them. Window panes clicked softly as the night air settled in. Sometimes there'd be a drip, a single soft sound from the wash basin left on the washstand, or the faint rustle of someone turning in their sleep in the next room. And of course, the clock. Every house had one, often more than one. A tall grandfather clock ticking solemnly in the hallway. A small brass carriage clock on the nightstand. Tick, tick, tick. Not intrusive, never rushed. Just a patient measure of time's passage, like a heartbeat you could hear in the walls. For children, the night could feel immense. The darkness deeper, the spaces bigger, the creaks louder. But even then, comfort could be found in the repetition. The same dog barking, the same chimney groaning, the same wind pressing gently on the shutters. And if you were very lucky, the soft sound of your mother humming from her own room down the hall. Sleep came slowly in these rooms, not chased by screens or interrupted by light, but welcomed like an old friend. Because in the silence, there was presence. In the absence of noise, there was space to let go. Sometimes, illness brought with it a new set of sounds. The damp cough of a family member, the careful steps of a nursemaid. But even then, the rhythm of the house continued. The clock did not stop. The fire still whispered. The wind still wandered. Even sorrow, wrapped in that silence, had its own soft song. But not every sound was so somber. In some homes, laughter drifted through the walls, muffled by thick plaster and heavy wallpaper. A baby's coo, a teenager sneaking a biscuit from the kitchen, a dog dreaming, its paws twitching against the floor. All of it part of the great, quiet tapestry of nighttime life. And so, as you lie here now, wherever you are, imagine those sounds. The fire fading, the footsteps stilled, the soft tick of the clock by your head. Let them gather around you like a blanket. Let the house speak to you, not in shouts, not in words, but in the old language of settling wood, shifting embers, and wind that means no harm. Because sometimes, sleep doesn't arrive all at once. It comes in the spaces between sounds, in the breath between ticks, in the hush between footsteps. You are not alone. You are in good company. People have drifted to these sounds for centuries, and now it's your turn. There's something deeply comforting in the idea of layering, of building warmth not from one single thing, but from the gentle accumulation of many, like moments, like memories, like fabric upon fabric pulled across the body until nothing cold can reach you. The Victorian bed was a study in layers. It began with the mattress thick, but not always soft by modern standards. The wealthy might sleep upon feather mattresses, full of goose down or duck feathers, lovingly fluffed and stitched into delicate compartments to prevent bunching. The poor might make do with straw stuffed into ticking, a tightly woven fabric meant to contain whatever filler could be spared. Sometimes horsehair, sometimes old rags, but that was just the beginning. On top of the mattress was usually a bottom, sheet smooth, often linen or cotton, washed weekly by hand. It was tucked tightly around the sides and corners of the bed frame, using a precise set of folds handed down from one housemaid to the next. Then came the top sheet, lighter, but long enough to fold back at the top and cover the sleeper fully, from chin to toe. And then the layers began. Blankets, thick, woven wool, sometimes coarse, sometimes surprisingly soft. In poorer homes, patchwork quilts might be used, scraps of old dresses, shirts, or aprons stitched together over time. These weren't just warm, they were stories. Every square remembered something. After that came the counterpane, a decorative cover, quilted or embroidered, often in whites or creams, that was meant to be seen during the day when the bed was made. It might be folded back before sleep, or left atop the other layers for added warmth. Some homes had lace-trimmed covers, passed down through generations, with yellowed threads that still held their shape, in especially cold homes, and most were cold and eider-down or feather-stuffed. Comforter might crown the pile, puffy, light, and luxurious. It created a final layer that trapped warmth without weight. Beneath all this, the bed itself groaned gently when someone climbed in. Ropes beneath the mattress might be tightened every few weeks to keep the bed from sagging, hence the old phrase, sleep tight. In higher-end homes, slatted frames or iron supports were common. But the principle was the same structure below. Softness above, and softness was relative. Many people slept with their clothes partially on shirts, petticoats, or long stockings, not out of laziness, but necessity. Removing too many layers could mean shivering through the night. Sleepwear was often thin and with no central heating. The body had to preserve what warmth it could. Pillows were stuffed with feathers or wool. Some used just one. Others propped themselves up with several, believing it was healthier to sleep. Elevated. Certain pillows had herbal fillings, lavender, hops, or chamomile, thought to aid with rest. A small pillow sachet might even be tucked beneath the pillowcase, releasing its scent slowly through the night. Sometimes, hot water bottles were used, porcelain or metal containers filled with boiled water and wrapped in cloth. These were slipped between the sheets before bed, warming the space just enough to make slipping under the covers less of a shock. Others used bed warmers, metal pans filled with coals, and passed between the sheets moments before lying down. In the wealthiest homes, a servant would have done this in advance. In the poorest, you relied on the warmth of the person beside you. Beds were not always solitary. In fact, in most of the world and in most of history, sleeping alone was unusual. Husbands and wives shared beds. Children curled up beside siblings. Boarders slept side by side with strangers in lodging houses. Space was scarce. Warmth was shared. Even the bed curtains, if the bed had them, added their own layer, not just of fabric, but of sound. When pulled shut, they dulled the noise of footsteps, of fire grates settling, of the wind's mournful whistle outside. They created a world dash within dash, a dash world dot. And when the candles were snuffed and only shadows remained, these layers of fabric, of silence, of care, folded over the sleeper like a lullaby. Imagine yourself now beneath all of it, the mattress firm, yet giving, the sheets cool against your skin, but quickly warmed, the weight of the wool blanket pressing just enough to anchor your thoughts, the comforter puffing up lightly over your legs, the faint smell of clean cotton, of old wood, of something floral, faint but present. You shift just a little, and the bed responds with a soft sigh. The pillows adjust. Your body remembers the shape of rest. There's no need to hurry, no alarm to dread. Just you, and the deep cocoon of stillness that was so carefully, so thoughtfully built. Every fold, every stitch, every press of fabric was a gesture, a signal to the body that it could stop now, that it had permission to let go. So breathe deeply, feel the weight of sleep pulling at your limbs, like another blanket, invisible but just as real. The night is long. The house is quiet. The bed is yours. There's something sacred about the moments before bed. Even in our own time, the brushing of teeth, the dimming of lights, the fluffing of pillows. We observe quiet rituals without thinking. They steady the mind, they soothe the body. And in Victorian England, these final moments before the pillow were rich with meaning. And sometimes, mystery in homes across the country. As the final candle burned low and the last footsteps faded down the hallway, people began their preparations for sleep. And sleep, to the Victorian mind, was not just a biological need, it was a vulnerable state. One slipped not simply into sleep, but into another realm. So the transition had to be handled gently. In wealthier homes, the rituals were layered and deliberate. A lady might sit at her dressing table, brushing her hair precisely 100 strokes, as was commonly advised for health and shine. A servant might draw the bed curtains, warm the linens with a pan of coals, or place a warmed brick at the foot of the mattress, wrapped in cloth. A pitcher of fresh water was left nearby, just in case the sleeper awoke thirsty in the night. But even in simpler homes, the routines carried comfort. Clothes were folded carefully, slippers were aligned side by side, the wash basin was emptied, or covered. And before slipping under the covers, a moment of stillness, a whispered prayer, a crossed heart, a hand laid gently on a sleeping child. Some families had bedtime sayings, little rhymes or blessings passed down through generations. Sleep well and rise whole. God guard your rest. Let no bad dream trouble your head. There were superstitions, too. Oh yes, the Victorians lived with one foot in science and one in shadow. It was said that placing a Bible beneath your pillow could protect you from nightmares. Others tucked sprigs of lavender or rosemary into the bed to ward off evil spirits, or encourage peaceful dreams. A common folk belief warned never to sleep with your feet facing the door, the coffin position, as it was called. It was thought to tempt death, to confuse the spirits, or to make your soul more vulnerable to wandering in sleep. Mirrors were sometimes covered at night, especially in rooms where someone had died. People believed that a soul might become trapped in its reflection, or that mirrors could act as windows into the other world during the deepest parts of sleep. Even the placement of the bed mattered. Some homes placed it with the headboard firmly against the wall to provide stability physically and spiritually. A bed floating in the center of a room or pushed into a corner felt exposed, vulnerable. In more rural areas, charms were placed. Above the bed, a horseshoe, a woven cross of straw, or even dried herbs tied with twine. They weren't loud superstitions, just precautions. Little ways to feel safer in the dark. And speaking of dark, it was never truly black. Most bedrooms had some flicker of light, the faint glow of the hearth if the fire hadn't quite gone out, a sliver of moonlight through the curtain, or the small orange pulse of a dying candle stub. True oppressive darkness was rare and unwelcome. Sleep came in stages too. There was no expectation of an uninterrupted 8 hours. In fact, many Victorians followed what we now call segmented sleep. They would drift off in the early evening, sleep for a few hours, then wake briefly to tend the fire, check on children, read scripture, or simply lie awake in contemplation before falling back to sleep again until morning. This middle-of-the-night wakefulness wasn't seen as a problem. It was natural, normal, even useful. Some even wrote in journals or completed small household tasks in the hush of the second watch. It was a liminal time, when thoughts were softer, slower, and perhaps closer to the heart, and always, when sleep returned, it was welcomed. There were also tales passed between siblings in the dark, stories meant to entertain or to scare, depending on the mood. Ghosts were common, as were old family legends. Children huddled under quilts, waiting for the punchline, or the chill. It was all part of the winding down, and when the story ended and the room returned to stillness, each person would roll toward the warmth of their pillow, tug the covers a little higher, and sink. It's peaceful to imagine, isn't it? A world where nighttime wasn't resisted, where the dark wasn't feared, just respected, where a little superstition, a little ritual, made sleep feel like a return, not a departure. Now, as you lie here, perhaps you, too, have your own small routines, the position of your hands, the way you fold the edge of the blanket near your shoulder, the glance toward a familiar object on the nightstand. These are your charms, your prayers, your quiet customs. You are no different from them. So let the night settle in. Let the pillow rise gently to meet your cheek. Let the silence expand around you like a gentle tide. Sleep is not a stranger. It's the oldest ritual you know. Winter in Victorian England was not something that arrived quietly. It came with hard frosts that curled window panes into lace, with chimneys coughing smoke into pale grey skies, and with a stillness that made even the bravest footsteps sound, hesitant against the frozen earth. And when it reached the bedroom, it stayed. Victorian homes were rarely warm by modern standards. Central heating didn't exist for most people, and insulation was poor at best. Walls were thick, but drafts found their way through every crack, under every door, and across every bare floorboard. So when night fell, staying warm was not an indulgence, it was a necessity, and it required planning in wealthier households. Coal fires were lit in bedroom hearths, small grates that radiated heat for a few hours before fading into embers. A servant would light the fire before sunset and return just before bed to stoke it again. The flicker of the flames offered both warmth and comfort, shadows dancing on the wallpaper, soft light licking at the rugs. But even then, the fire didn't last all night. Once the coals burned down, the cold crept in. This is where ritual took over. Beds were layered, as we've seen, but in the cold months, those layers grew heavier. Extra woolen blankets were brought out from chests. Quilts stitched with generations of fabric were unfolded. Sometimes, curtains were drawn tightly around the bed frame to keep heat in and icy air out. And then came the tricks, the small, clever tools that helped bodies stay warm through the long, frozen hours. The warming pan was one of the most iconic. It looked like a shallow brass pan with a long wooden handle. Inside it, glowing coals were placed, taken carefully from the fire. Then, the pan was slipped between the sheets and moved slowly back and forth across the mattress, warming the bed before anyone climbed in. It was a delicate process. Too fast, and the bed wasn't heated properly. Too slow, and the heat might scorch the sheets. Some warming pans even had holes punched in the lid to let out the scent of herbs, lavender, thyme, or pennyroyal, meant to soothe or even ward off pests. In time, stoneware or ceramic hot water bottles replaced the coal pans in many homes. These were filled with boiling water and sealed with a stopper. Wrapped in flannel or thick socks, they were tucked under the covers at the foot of the bed to warm cold toes. They cooled slowly through the night, still faintly warm by morning if the night wasn't too bitter in the poorest homes. There were no hot water bottles, no warming pans. But even there, people found a way. They warmed bricks in the hearth, wrapping them in cloth and laying them under the covers before bedtime. The bricks held heat surprisingly well, and were used again and again, passed from hand to hand with whispered gratitude on the coldest nights. And when the bricks weren't enough, people huddled Children shared beds. Spouses slept close. Extra coats or petticoats were laid across the blanket like extra insulation. Some even slept with their heads completely beneath the covers, creating a small pocket of warm breath in the dark. Wool bed socks were common, thick, hand-knitted, and slightly scratchy. Some wore gloves to bed. Others kept a shawl wrapped around their shoulders beneath their nightshirt. Victorian nightcaps, often ridiculed today, were not fashion accessories, but survival gear. They trapped precious heat and protected the ears and scalp from the worst of the night air. Even the furniture was arranged to help. Beds were often placed away from the window. Corners were colder. Heavy curtains were drawn early, sometimes pinned shut to stop drafts. Rugs were laid thick on the floor, especially around the bed, to stop the icy bite of bare wood underfoot. But despite all these efforts, winter still found its way in, and so warmth became not just about temperature, but about ritual and mindset. The fire became something to watch as it faded, each coal turning to ash, like a soft clock ticking towards sleep. The careful folding of blankets became a meditative act, a last gesture of care at the end of the day, and sleep itself, with its stillness and breath, became a quiet rebellion against the cold. Even illness changed with the seasons. The Victorians feared catching a chill more than most things. They believed cold air could cause pneumonia, rheumatism, or worse. So staying warm at night was tied to staying alive. Bed rest was not just rest, it was recovery ritualized into every fold and coverlet. And so warmth was cherished, not taken for granted. A cup of hot milk before bed, a child's cold toes tucked beneath a parent's legs, a scarf hung on the bedpost, just in case. The last orange glow of the fire, watched until the eyes could no longer stay open. You can almost feel it now, can't you? The slight scratch of wool blankets, the hard shape of a warm brick near your feet, the way your breath rises like smoke in the cold air, then fades again into the dark dot, and through it all, the stillness. A house sleeping in the heart of winter, wood groaning softly, wind curling around the eaves. The warmth you've built, not just in your bed, but in the body, in the memory holding you like an invisible quilt. Tonight, let that same quiet warmth find you, not from central heating or electric blankets, but from the deep human memory of how we've always tried to stay warm together, with fabric, with fire, with love. Not every bed was slept in alone. In fact, most weren't. Sharing a bed in Victorian England was not solely a matter of romance or family. It was practical, cultural, and sometimes simply unavoidable. To understand the Victorian night fully, we must picture not just a person lying beneath a blanket, but two, or three, or more, curled close under one roof, beneath one heavy quilt. Start first with the married couple. The image of husband and wife sleeping side by side is familiar to us, but in Victorian households, it came with its own set of formalities. Beds for couples varied depending on space and wealth. Some slept in full double beds, what we might call a standard bed today. Others in twin beds pushed together or in separate rooms entirely, especially among the upper class. This separation wasn't necessarily emotional distance. Rather, it was viewed as proper, respectable, and often medically advised. Doctors of the time sometimes believed that sharing a bed could disturb one's rest, that to heartbeats, to temperatures, to shifting bodies created too much chaos for good health. So among the elite, having separate bedrooms, each decorated to suit the occupant, was common. And yet, visits between rooms occurred. quietly, privately, a slippered foot across the hall, a knock, a candle, a closing door. These were the rhythms of marriage, intimate but discreet. Among the working class, things were quite different. Space was limited. Beds were expensive. Firewood was precious. So to share a bed wasn't just about affection, it was about survival. Husbands and wives slept together out of necessity. Children too were folded into the fabric of nightly routine. Infants sleeping beside mothers for nursing. Toddlers between parents for warmth. Older children curled at the foot of the mattress or in shared beds of their own. In homes with more children than bedrooms, siblings shared everything, including the pillow. A brother and sister might sleep head to foot to avoid arguments. A group of boys, shoulder to shoulder. A trio of girls in a single bed beneath a patched quilt. There was comfort in this closeness, but also etiquette. You did not speak loudly in the bed. You turned over carefully. You respected the space, however small, of the other sleeper beside you, and if someone cried in the night, a soft hand might reach out without words. Just a gentle touch, the quiet message, you're not alone. In boarding houses, strangers shared beds. This might surprise modern sensibilities, but in Victorian inns or lodging homes, the bed was often rented, not the room. A traveller might arrive late and find himself lying beside a man he'd never met. They'd sleep facing opposite directions, fully clothed and without speaking. It was awkward, yes, but normal. Etiquette in these situations was firm. No unnecessary movement, no questions, no waking the other unless urgent, and always sleep facing outward, not toward the stranger. This practice, called bed sharing or hot bedding, was economical. One mattress, 2 fees, sometimes even more. Beds were used in shifts, like tools. While one person worked, another slept. Even in hospitals and workhouses, multiple people often shared space. Sometimes beds, sometimes narrow cots placed so closely together that breathing felt communal. Privacy was rare, but rest, in some form, was still found. And yes, romantic intimacy occurred. In marriage, of course, sometimes outside it. A stolen hour before sunrise, a whispered laugh beneath the blankets. The Victorians were more complex than their reputation suggests. Modest in public, perhaps, but deeply human in the dark. Letters from the era show tenderness, longing, a hunger for closeness that found its expression beneath those woolen covers. But just as often, the act of sleeping together was not romantic. It was simply shared humanity. To sleep beside someone was to share warmth, breath, memory, to hear their breathing slow, to feel the bed shift gently as they dreamed, to know, without looking, that someone was there. Imagine now your own Victorian bed. You lie on one side, curled inward. Beside you, someone stirs, a spouse, a child, a sibling. The blankets are heavy. The fire is low. The silence is full of presence. There's a comfort in shared stillness, not in words, not in touch, even, but in knowing that you are not the only heartbeat in the room. There's something ancient about it, something almost animal, the instinct to draw close in the cold, to feel safety in numbers, to rest because another body is near enough to keep watch. Tonight, you carry that same instinct, the knowledge that sleep comes easier beside another, that we are not made for total solitude, that even the silence is warmer when shared. So close your eyes, feel the bed shift just slightly, a breath, a presence, and beneath it all, a steady hush. You are not alone, and you never were. The Victorians were thinkers, dreamers, and builders, but they were also deeply superstitious. And when it came to sleep, that vulnerable threshold between life and death, between body and spirit, they held to 1,000 quiet rules, customs, and warnings. Some were passed down in families, like bedtime prayers. Others were printed in the backs of household almanacs. Many were whispered from mother to child, tucked inside lullabies, or folded into nightly routines as naturally as blowing out a candle. Let us walk slowly into that shadowy space where sleep met belief. One of the most widely held ideas, especially in rural areas, was that your bed must not face north. To sleep with your head toward the north was thought to invite illness, confusion, or even death. Why north? Some said it was the direction the dead were laid in their coffins. Others claimed the earth's magnetic pull interfered with dreams, muddling the spirit. Still, others thought it was simply bad luck, and that those who ignored the rule found themselves plagued by nightmares or lingering fatigue. It wasn't unusual for beds to be moved during illness, turned carefully toward east or west as the sun moved through the sky. Healing, they believed, came more easily when one's head faced the morning. Another curious belief involved open windows, especially in the bedrooms of the sick. It was common to crack a window, even in the dead of winter, believing that fresh air drew out the disease, or kept bad humors from building up during the night. Of course, this made for cold sleeping, but fresh air was medicine in the Victorian mind, even if it came wrapped in frost. In some homes, mirrors were covered at night, especially after a death. It was said that the soul, wandering free in dreams, might get trapped in the reflection, lost, confused, unable to return. Even healthy sleepers were warned not to face a mirror while they slept. Reflection in the dark was never trusted. People also took care never to place a hat on the bed, as this, too, was thought to invite death or misfortune. If someone did it by accident, they might quickly cross themselves or whisper a protection. Prayer under their breath, shoes left upside down near the bed were another concern. The inverted sole might attract spirits, particularly restless ones. Shoes, like mirrors, were believed to hold shape and memory. How you left them mattered. Bed linens, too, had their rules. If a corner of the blanket hung to the floor, it was said to let cold spirits in. If the sheet was tucked too tightly, it might trap dreams. If you dreamt of water, someone close to you was said to be sick. If you dreamt of teeth falling out, a classic, even then, it foretold sorrow or loss. Dreams were taken seriously. Many kept dream journals, small books kept beside the bed where one could scribble down what had come during the night. They believed that dreams carried messages, warnings, sometimes or reflections of what the soul experienced during its wandering. Nightmares were called night tags by some old folklore that suggested an evil spirit or witch sat upon your chest in the night, stealing your breath. Sleep paralysis, unknown to science then, fed this myth, the feeling of being awake, yet frozen, unable to move or speak. To ward off such visions, lavender, rosemary, or even iron keys were placed beneath the pillow. A Bible might be opened to a particular psalm. Some even whispered protective verses before closing their eyes. There was also the curious case of the death watch, beetle, an insect whose tapping was believed to foretell death. Its name alone was enough to send chills. If you heard it while lying in bed, well, best to say a prayer and pull the blankets tighter. But not all beliefs were grim. Some were playful, hopeful, even romantic. It was said that placing a bay leaf beneath your pillow on Valentine's Eve might let you dream of your future spouse. Others used rose petals or apple peelings, whispering a name as they lay down, hoping for a vision. Young women might tie a ribbon in their hair before bed to attract sweet dreams, or write the name of a beloved on a slip of paper and place it under the pillow. These rituals, gentle and full of longing, gave shape to the quiet hopes of sleep. And always, always, one must never go to bed angry. It was said to give power to dark dreams, to sour the morning, to weaken the soul. So apologies were offered softly in the dark. A hand reached across the bed. A whispered "I'm sorry" before sleep sealed the day. All of these beliefs, whether old wives' tales or deeply held convictions, had one thing in common. They made the night feel less unknown. They gave shape to the shapeless. They made sleep not an absence, but a passage. So now, as you lie in your own quiet room, feel the echoes of those beliefs around you. Maybe your bed does face north. Maybe your mirror catches the moonlight. Maybe you've never placed rosemary beneath your pillow, or flipped your shoes upright at bedtime. But still, there is something beautiful in the care they took. The thought, the intention, the belief that sleep mattered, that the body, the mind, and the soul all deserved protection in the dark. So rest now. No bad dreams, no wandering souls, only breath, only warmth, only sleep. There's a peculiar stillness that lives in the very middle of the night, not the falling into sleep, not the rising from it, but the quiet moment in between. In Victorian England, this wasn't an interruption. It was expected. It was called the watch, and it marked the natural pause between what people then understood as first sleep and second sleep. You see, for much of human history, long before the invention of electric light, sleep came in two parts. People went to bed early, often shortly after dusk, and slept deeply for 3 to 4 hours. Then, quite naturally, they awoke. There was no alarm, no urgency, just a drifting upward into a space that wasn't quite waking and not quite dreaming. It might have been 11 o'clock, maybe midnight, perhaps a little after, and then came the watch, a period of gentle wakefulness that lasted 1 to 2 hours, depending on the person, the season, or the circumstance. This time was not feared or fought. It was used. Some rose from bed and stoked the fire. Others lit a candle, wrapped themselves in shawls or dressing gowns, and read quietly. Religious texts were common, a psalm, a devotional, a letter from a loved one. It was a time for peace. Reflection in households, where privacy was a luxury. The watch offered something rare, stillness without interruption. Children slept on. The streets were empty. There was no expectation to be doing anything. No bells, no visitors, no chores, just a moment to be. Some wrote in journals, using this pocket of silence to record dreams, emotions, or plans. Some took the opportunity to pray. It was said that the veil between the worlds was thinnest at this hour, that God might hear more clearly. Others simply lay still, staring into the dark, thinking thoughts they had no time for during the day. There are letters from the time that described this phenomenon without alarm. It was simply how sleep worked, a rhythm tuned to the body's needs and the sun's departure. Husbands and wives sometimes whispered to one another during the watch. In the hush of midnight, intimacy deepened. A quiet conversation, a shared recollection, sometimes affection. Even physicians of The Time wrote about it. One doctor noted that many people awake at this hour, perfectly calm, only to return to their beds and fall again into slumber as naturally as the tide recedes and returns. In colder months, the fire might be checked, the embers stirred, a cup of warm broth or milk might be taken, heated quickly over the grate, or poured from a kettle kept warm beside it. Sipping it slowly, eyes still half-lidded, the sleeper allowed their body to rest, while their mind hovered gently above it. Eventually, without ritual, without resistance, second sleep would come. It came not with urgency, but with permission. You felt it like a weight returning. The thoughts slowed, the limbs softened. The bed, once a perch, became a cradle again, and the second sleep was different, deeper. Stranger, it was said that dreams came more vividly in the second sleep. That spirits, if they visited at all, came during that final stretch before dawn. Even the body reacted differently. The breath grew slower, the muscles slackened more fully. The room, colder now, wrapped around the sleeper more tightly than before. This rhythm, first sleep, the watch, second sleep, made room for contemplation. It gave space to the soul. It allowed people to rise with the sun, not with the panic of alarms, but with the quiet fulfillment of a night properly observed. But as gas lamps spread, as work schedules grew rigid, as artificial light extended the day, this rhythm faded. People were told to sleep through the night, that waking was a disorder, that the watch was a mistake. But the Victorians, they remembered, and many still lived by it. So if you've ever woken in the middle of the night and thought, why now? If your body feels alert, your mind gently buzzing, and you feel no fear but only quiet awareness, you are not broken. You are not restless. You are simply remembering. You are slipping briefly into the space the Victorians called home. A breath between two tides. A pause between stories, so lie there, if you like. Turn gently. Pull the blanket higher, or rise. Light a candle in your thoughts, and sit with yourself. It is your watch. And soon your second sleep will come, soft, certain, and full of dreams. The stillness of a Victorian night was occasionally broken, not by noise, but by the body's quiet reminder. Nature waits for no one, not even in the most elegant bedroom. And so, among the lace and linen, the carved wood and candlelight, there existed a far more humble fixture. The chamber pot. It was not spoken of often, not shown, not admired. And yet, it was present in almost every bedroom, from the humblest cottage to the grandest estate. Tucked beneath the bed, hidden in a cabinet, resting discreetly beneath the washstand draped in linen. The chamber pot was essential, especially during cold nights, or when illness kept someone confined to their room, or in houses with no indoor plumbing, which, in the Victorian age, was nearly all of them. Imagine it now, a porcelain bowl, rounded and lidded, sometimes with a handle. In working-class homes, it might be metal, simple, dented, and worn. In wealthier bedrooms, it could be hand-painted, decorated with blue floral scrolls or delicate motifs, tucked into a mahogany commode that resembled a small cupboard. Some even had humorous phrases etched inside the bowl, a hidden joke for those who dared look, a touch of levity, perhaps, to an otherwise unmentionable topic. It was used in silence. Late at night, if the need arose, one simply reached beneath the bed, drew it out carefully, trying not to clink against the bed frame, and used it as quietly as possible. In shared rooms, this was done with a mixture of shame and routine. In solitude, it was simply practical. The alternative, after all, was far less appealing. To walk the dark hallways, to descend cold, creaking stairs, to go out into the night to an outhouse, a privy, a freezing stone floor. No, the chamber pot, for all its inelegance, was mercy. In the morning, it was emptied, by whom depended entirely on class. In upper-class homes, a maid or footman would collect the pot after knocking discreetly. They'd carry it, carefully balanced on a tray, to the scullery or servants' quarters, where it would be emptied, rinsed, and scrubbed, then returned as if it had never been used. In poorer homes, the pot was emptied by the person who used it, poured into the backyard privy, a chamber, or in crowded cities, even into shared gutters in the alleys. Part of the notorious night soil problem that plagued Victorian sanitation, and yet, despite its necessity, it was never displayed. It was kept low, covered. Hidden children were taught not to ask about it. Guests pretended not to notice it. But every house had one. It was paired with the washstand, another staple of the bedroom, more refined perhaps, but equally tied to basic needs. A typical washstand stood waist-high, with a flat surface and a small shelf below. Upon it sat a large pitcher, heavy and full, and a wide basin, often made of matching porcelain. Some were plain, others bore elegant floral designs. In wealthier homes, they might be edged in gold or deep cobalt blue. Every morning and every night, water was poured from the pitcher into the basin. Hands and face were washed with a cloth. In colder months, the water stung with chill. Sometimes, warm water was carried up from the kitchen, steaming faintly in the air, but often it was cold. The splash was part of the day's rhythm, the dipping of a rag, the slow drying of the face with a coarse towel, the clearing away of the night. A bar of soap rested nearby, thick, cracked, fragrant or not, depending on the household. Some used lavender, others plain lye. The towel hung from a peg on the wall or a rod at the side of the stand, and when the washing was done, the water, now cloudy, was poured into a second chamber beneath, or down a bucket to be thrown out later. There was no running tap, no drain. It was all movement, memory, and care. And nearby, often behind a small screen, stood a modest commode chair, a wooden frame fitted with a chamber pot beneath a hinged seat. Elderly family members, women recovering from childbirth, or the ill might use it during long stretches in bed. Some commodes were elegant, upholstered, carved, made to resemble proper chairs. Others were purely practical. It was all a matter of necessity wrapped in manners, because the Victorian bedroom was not just a place for rest. It was a microcosm of the entire house. It was private, yes, but full of quiet function, of needs met discreetly, of rituals carried out with dignity, of discomforts softened by routine. So now, as you lie in your own bed, with taps that run, with light at the touch of a button, imagine the care that once went into simply preparing for sleep. Imagine the quiet sound of a pitcher being filled, the slow creak of a washstand drawer, the hush of a chamber pot being replaced. Not glamorous, not poetic, but deeply human. Sleep was not about escape. It was about maintaining grace, even in the dark. So tonight, let that sense of gentle function guide your rest. You are warm, you are cared for. You are, in every way that matters, complete. There was a time when most people did not die in hospitals or care homes, but in their own bedrooms, in the very beds where they had once been born, laughed, wept, and dreamed. In Victorian England, death at home was expected, and the bedroom, already a place of intimacy and silence, became the stage for life's most solemn moment. The phrase "died peacefully in their sleep" was not just a hope, it was the preferred way to go, quietly, without pain, surrounded by familiar things, a fire still burning low, curtains drawn, hands held. Let us imagine such a room now. The bed is tidy but subdued. The person within is no longer resting, but nearing their final rest. Their breathing is faint, uneven. A family member sits nearby, perhaps reading scripture aloud. A nurse, maybe a hired woman, or simply a daughter dabs the forehead with cool cloth. Time moves differently in this space, not hour by hour, but moment by moment. In wealthier homes, death came with ritual. Mirrors were covered with black cloth to prevent the soul from becoming trapped in the glass. Clocks were stopped at the hour of passing. The bed itself was dressed in white, fresh linens, clean pillows, and sometimes a crucifix or small bouquet placed upon the chest. Candles were lit. The room smelled of beeswax and lavender. It was a still place, not silent, but gentle. Even in poorer homes, similar care was taken. The dying were rarely left alone. A neighbor might be called, a midwife who also knew how to sit vigil, a cousin who knew the prayers. Children were sometimes kept out of the room, or sometimes brought in, depending on the family. The dying often murmured things, names, memories, or nothing at all. Some seemed to slip into sleep. Others grasped a hand tightly until the final moment. Some waited until a particular person arrive, a son, a wife, a sibling, before letting go. When death finally came, it was marked by quiet. A hand drawn over the eyes to close them. A breath released. A pause. And then, the slow beginning of what came next. The bed remained the center of this transition. The body was washed right there, often by the women of the family, with care, with reverence. Dressed in nightclothes, or a funeral shroud, positioned with arms folded, eyes closed, a small book or flower placed gently in the hands. In many homes, the body lay in state for a day or more, especially if the family was waiting for loved ones to arrive. Neighbors came to pay respects. Curtains stayed drawn. The room was hushed. Tea was served in whispers. And in that bed, the one that had held a life through its most ordinary nights, a final story was now resting, for those who could afford it. Undertakers were summoned. They brought mourning clothes, carriages, and caskets. But for many, death was handled at home, by hand. The bedroom became the last resting place before the churchyard. There was dignity in this, not fear. Death was not hidden. Children saw it. Adults cared for it. It was part of the rhythm. And just as a woman might give birth in a bed, surrounded by those she loved, she might also die in one, held by those same arms. There were also customs, for after the sheets were removed, the mattress sometimes turned, the room left empty for a time. Some kept the room as it was, a shrine of sorts. Others changed it immediately, unable to bear the memory, in both rich and poor homes. Mourning crept into the walls. Black ribbons were tied to door knockers. Black crape hung from mirrors. The bedroom, even after it had returned to sleep and silence, was never quite the same. But over time, life returned. The bed was used again. The linens replaced. The fire lit once more, and someone, perhaps years later, might lie there again, unaware of the stories woven into the threads. unaware that the room had once held a final breath. The Victorians saw death not as a sudden rupture, but as the final chapter in the life of a room. The bedroom was not just for rest, it was for passing, and passing was not to be feared. It was to be prepared for, tended, and honored. So tonight, as you lie in your own room, safe, warm, held, take comfort in the knowledge that the bed you lie in carries more than just your own weight. It carries the memory of every soul who has ever drifted from breath into stillness, every hand that has been held, every story that has reached its quiet end. And perhaps, in that understanding, sleep comes even more gently, not as a forgetting, but as a return. While much of Victorian England lay beneath heavy blankets and flickering dreams, not everyone had the luxury of rest. For the servants, the invisible hands of every grand home, the night never fully belonged to sleep. Their bedrooms were narrow, tucked into attics or basements. Their beds, modest at best. And yet, their lives after dark were filled not with silence, but with small, steady tasks meant to keep the great house breathing softly through the long hours. Imagine it. The great house asleep, the front hall silent, the clocks ticking gently, and down a narrow staircase, lit by a single candle, someone stirs. A maid rises before sunrise, often in the dark, to warm the hearth in her mistress's room before she wakes. She moves quietly, careful not to knock over coal or creak the floorboards. Her slippers are worn, her shawl wrapped tight, her hands red from cold water. She empties the chamber pot, refills the basin with fresh water, fluffs the pillows, draws the curtains ever so slightly to let in the first hint of grey light. She does all of this without being seen. In the downstairs quarters, the butler sleeps lightly. His uniform is folded on a chair beside him. If a bell rings in the night, a guest needing a fire relit, or someone returned late from a journey, he will rise instantly, no complaint, and attend to the task. There is a rhythm to it, a kind of obedience carved into the hours. Servants slept lightly. They had to. They were expected to be ready, always, to rise without question, to disappear without fuss. In country houses, the scullery maid might begin her work even earlier, scrubbing pans from the evening before, clearing ashes from the range, washing vegetables by lantern light, her hands immersed in freezing water before the sun has touched the horizon, and still no recognition. The household above will wake to a warmed towel, a steaming cup of tea, a tidy chamber, with no thought of who made it so. Even in middle-class homes, where there may be only one servant, a maid of all work, the responsibilities did not end at bedtime. She might sleep in the kitchen or in a small closet off the stairs, barely a room at all, her rest interrupted by crying children, rattling windows, or her own weary thoughts of the day ahead. Nursemaids, in particular, lived by the rhythm of others. They shared the nursery with their young charges, rising to soothe them in the night, to change their linens if they were ill, to rock them back to sleep. And when dawn came, they were already folding fresh clothes for the morning. It was a life of service, a life of softness withheld, so that others might know comfort. But even within this, there were moments of peace. A maid pausing in the corridor to warm her hands by a small kitchen stove. A butler standing silently in the dark dining room, gazing out at the moonlit garden. A nursemaid, half asleep, humming gently as a child settles into her lap. Their nights were not theirs, but they found stillness in the edges. Sleep, when it came, was brief, precious, not wrapped in feather down or silks, but in the body's deep relief. To lie down fully, finally, was a victory, even on a straw mattress, even under a single thin blanket, and on occasion there was kindness. A cup of cocoa left out by a kind mistress, an extra blanket brought down to the scullery, a soft word from the master when he passed the butler on a sleepless night. But more often there was silence. The servant's bedroom was not a refuge, it was a station, a corner of pause, a place where shoes were removed, but obligations remained, even. So they dreamed of homes of their own, of mornings without bells, of beds they didn't have to make. And so tonight, perhaps spare a moment for the sleeper below the stairs, the one who lit the fire you're now warming by, the one who folded your gown, the one who will wake long before you in the dark to do it all again. Sleep may have been a gift they gave others, but sometimes, in the softest hours, they received it to not grand, not gilded, but honest and deep. In the Victorian home, illness did not live in hospitals. It lived in bedrooms, whether it was a fever, a chill, a child's cough, or something more serious. When sickness came, it came home, and the bedroom transformed. The mattress, once simply a cradle for nightly rest, became a raft in uncertain waters. Let's open the door to one such room. Gently now, the air is still. The fire is burning low, carefully tended. The bed has been made tighter than usual, its layers folded and arranged for comfort, for access, for care. A woman lies quietly beneath the blankets. Her forehead glistens. A washcloth rests nearby. On the nightstand, a bowl of broth, a glass bottle with a cork stopper, a folded note. Beside her, a nursemaid dozes in a wooden chair, her eyes half closed, hands folded. This is the sick room. Every household had the potential to become one. Sickness was part of life in the 19th century, and often it stayed for days, or weeks, or longer. Hospitals were few, often feared, and rarely welcoming for anything less than emergencies. Most care happened at home. For the wealthy, this meant a private room, often well ventilated, with hired nurses and a physician who visited daily. For the poor, it meant a shared bed, no help but family, and medicine taken with hope more than certainty. The signs were clear when a bedroom became a sick room. Curtains were drawn not just for sleep, but to limit light. Candles were kept low. The bedding was changed more frequently. Not an easy task when everything had to be carried by hand, washed in basins, dried by the fire. Chamber pots were used more often, as the ill might be too weak to rise. Their contents carried away with care and with discretion. A washstand became a pharmacy. Bottles of tonic, spoons, folded cloths for compresses. There might be a kettle always warm nearby for tea or steam. The scent of camphor or vinegar might linger in the air. Old remedies for breathing and fever. Silence ruled the room. Voices were lowered. Steps softened. Doors closed with the gentlest click. A child might be hushed as they passed in the hall. Even the tick of the clock seemed to slow. Family members took turns sitting watch, reading aloud, dabbing a brow, holding a hand that reached up in delirium. Doctors came and went, often bringing with them more questions than answers. Their black bags clinked faintly as they opened, revealing small bottles, folded gauze, surgical instruments kept clean. With care, there was faith, too. A Bible might be opened and left at the foot of the bed. Prayers whispered softly each evening, a cross placed nearby. It didn't matter if you were rich or poor. The quiet between breaths was filled with hope and fear. For children, the sick room was a place of strange quiet. They might be kept away entirely, or, in more crowded homes, might fall ill themselves, one after another, the bed becoming a nest for little limbs. Flushed cheeks, warm foreheads. Mothers moved tirelessly, changing sheets, spooning broth, cooling the air, warming the heart. And when sleep came, it was not full. It was fragile. The ill slept in short bursts, waking often, reaching for water, murmuring dreams. Caretakers slept in chairs, arms crossed, heads bowed forward. It was a sleep of duty. But even here there was tenderness. A cool cloth pressed to a fevered temple. A lullaby sung softly by a window. A bowl of soup stirred at dawn, though no one had eaten for days. The room itself became a kind of cocoon, drawn in, slowed down, sacred dot, and sometimes recovery came. The fever broke, the cheeks cooled, the color returned, and with it, the light. The curtains were drawn back. The window opened to fresh air. The bedding changed entirely, and the bed, once a place of worry, became a triumph. The first sit-up, the first meal eaten sitting up, the first full night of sleep in weeks. But not always. There were beds in Victorian England that never saw their owners rise again. A father, a mother, a child. The bed that once held sleep held passing. The family gathered around, a final prayer, a final breath, a silence that lasted longer than any before it. The sick room became the morning room, the sheets removed, the mirror covered, the fire let to fade, and then the door closed for a time, until someone, quietly, made the bed once more. The bed does not forget. It holds what it's given: illness, recovery, sorrow, sleep. So tonight, let us remember the weight of care that once lived in rooms just like yours. Let us honor the quiet acts of tending, of nursing, of waiting in silence beside someone we love. And let us be grateful for rest, for warmth, for ease of breath. You lie now in peace. Let your body heal in its own quiet way. Let your mind be cared for as gently as a mother once cared for a child beside a flickering fire. Let sleep return to this room, not with urgency, but with grace. Sleep in the Victorian countryside came with silence, the rustle of trees, the soft lowing of a cow, the wind slipping around corners. But in the cities, night was something else entirely. The city never truly slept, even as lamps were extinguished and shutters closed. There remained a murmur beneath the streets, a distant wheel turning, a boot scuffing on stone, the sigh of someone shifting in their attic room. Victorian cities were not quiet. They were close. People lived tightly packed. Tenements, boarding houses, narrow streets where one window faced another so closely that, with a whisper, you might hold a conversation between beds. And with that closeness came noise. Above your head, someone coughed in their sleep. Below your floorboards, a child whimpered for their mother. Next door, the bed frame groaned as someone turned over. A man muttered in his dreams. A baby cried. A kettle whistled as water was warmed to soothe a fever long after midnight. The walls were thin wood and plaster, worn by years of shared breath. You could hear arguments through them. Love, too. The shuffle of cards. A chair scraping the floor, and outside, the city HUMMED. Horse-drawn cabs, rattled over cobblestone streets. The drivers called to one another, low voices, sometimes laughter, sometimes frustration. Newsboys passed by, even late, selling the final printings of the day's edition. Their cries echoed through alleyways. Evening Star, murder in Whitechapel, gasworks explosion in Suffolk. In poorer quarters, the streets never fully emptied. Shopkeepers returned from late errands. The occasional drunkard sang, off-key beneath a flickering gas lamp. Policemen walked their beats, boots firm, lanterns swinging in rhythm with their stride. Even rats, bold in the dark, skittered through gutters, drawn to the day's crumbs left behind. But despite all of this, people still slept. They became accustomed to the noise. It was not a disruption, but a presence, a reassurance, even. To hear footsteps meant you weren't alone. To hear laughter meant someone was warm. To hear a piano, even poorly played, meant someone, somewhere, was still awake. Still alive. In boarding houses, rooms were divided by thin panels. A dozen tenants might share a single hallway, a single privy. Some worked days, others nights. Beds were used in shifts. You might fall asleep as another rose. There was always movement, but within that constant coming and going, a strange intimacy formed. People respected the quiet hours. They whispered. Instead of speaking, they closed doors gently. They lit their candles low. In wealthier neighborhoods, the city's sound changed. The carriages were smoother, the footman's boots softer. But even there, the world did not sleep soundlessly. Fire bells sometimes rang, sudden, startling, calling volunteers from blocks away. The gas lights hissed as they were extinguished, their scent lingering faintly. In the great houses, maids padded through corridors. Butlers coughed behind doors. No place, truly, was silent. Even the church bells marked the passage of time, striking the hours with solemn predictability. Midnight 1, 2. Some people woke briefly with each chime, turned in their beds, and drifted back to dreams. The smell of the city lingered at night, to dot in the day. It was masked by bustle, by cooking fires, bakeries, coal carts. But at night it rose. The scent of horse droppings, damp stone, smoke, refuse in the gutters. The heavy perfume of a city too tightly held. Still, the windows were opened, for air, for escape, for the sound of something other than one's own. Breaths in many homes, particularly those perched above shops or shared with other families. The air was filled with night speech, the quiet conversations of husbands and wives after children slept, the murmur of prayers, the recitation of poetry, a man practicing his reading, a woman humming to herself as she folded garments for the next day. Even those who couldn't sleep found comfort in these sounds. They meant life continued, that the city, even as it dozed, watched over itself. And then there was the first light, a blue tinge across brick and soot-stained windows. The sounds changed again, boots on stone, the rattle of a milk cart, a baker's door creaking open, the first shout of a dock worker down by the Thames. The city woke up in pieces, like a great beast stretching from slumber. But for now, let it rest. Let the distant carriage continue on. Let the neighbors murmur behind the wall. Let the wind play softly between chimney pots and laundry lines. Because here, in your small bed, in your quiet moment, there is stillness, not perfect silence, but the sleep of someone who belongs to a city, one that never stops, but still makes space for dreams. Let the sound wrap around you now, not a wall of noise, but a lullaby made of footsteps, wheels, and time. You are part of it, and it will carry you gently into morning. There is a certain stillness that wraps around all sleepers, whether they rest beneath silk or burlap. But in Victorian England, the experience of sleep differed dramatically, depending on who you were, where you lived, and what your hands had done during the day. Let's step into 2 bedrooms now, side by side, same night, same cold wind against the window, but 2 utterly different worlds. First, the wealthy home. We enter quietly through a wide doorway, our feet silenced by thick carpet. The walls are padded with wallpaper, floral or striped, chosen to match the drapes. There's a fire flickering softly in a small grate, warming the room with a gentle orange glow. The bed is high and wide, a 4-poster or canopy, dressed in linen sheets, woolen blankets, and a counterpane embroidered by hand. Feather pillows are propped at the head, and the mattress itself is deep, stuffed with goose down or layered over a sprung base. On one side of the room, a mahogany dressing table. On the other, a washstand set with matching porcelain pitcher and basin. A folded towel scented with lavender, a small brush, a cup for rinsing the mouth. On the nightstand, a clock, a book, perhaps a pair of spectacles. Maybe a biscuit left on a plate, in case of midnight hunger. A bell pull hangs nearby, ready to summon a servant if needed. Outside the door, a maid waits for the morning hour to enter and draw the curtains. Everything here speaks gently, not of extravagance, but of comfort as entitlement. Sleep is expected, softness ensured, warmth arranged in advance now. We cross the city or the village road or the alley behind the bakery and enter another room, much smaller. 1 window, 1 door. No wallpaper, only plaster yellowed at the edges. A single bed stands against the wall, low to the ground, its frame made of iron or plain wood, chipped and squeaking. The mattress, if you can call it that, is thin, perhaps stuffed with straw or old fabric, patched many times. The sheets, if present, are coarse and uneven. Blankets are heavy, not luxurious, just weighty. Sometimes patched quilts, sometimes coats. There may be a washstand, or just a chipped basin resting on the floor. The water inside is cold. The soap, a plain bar. Towels, hand-stitched or torn from old sheets. The chamber pot is dented tin. Uncovered, the fire. If it exists at all, it's small, smoky, and weak. More often, there is no fire, just breath turning to mist in the air. And yet, in this space, too, someone lies down, pulls the blanket close, closes their eyes, dreams. It is important to understand that the divide was not only material, it was deeply psychological. To be wealthy was to expect sleep. To be poor was to earn it. A laborer who dug roads or carried coal might sleep not from relaxation, but from exhaustion. His body demanded it. There was no pause, no luxury in the act, only surrender. Muscles ached, feet throbbed, skin still bore the sting of wind, stone, or soot, and yet sleep still came. Among children, the contrast was even sharper. A rich child might be tucked in by a nurse, told a bedtime story in perfect Queen's English, kissed softly on the brow, a candle extinguished with a silver snuffer. A poor child might curl beneath a single blanket, wedged beside siblings. They whispered stories of their own, tales from the street, from memory, from scraps of books passed hand to hand. They knew no feather pillows, but they knew the warmth of shared limbs, the comfort of soft breathing in the dark. The familiar sound of a sibling's cough or a mother's lullaby, murmured from the next room. Even dreams were different. The rich dreamt of holidays, of travel, of new boots or white gloves. The poor dreamt of warmth, of food, of shoes that didn't leak. And yet, in those dreams, there was beauty. Because no matter the class, the mind wanders freely in the dark in boarding houses. Rented beds were passed from one sleeper to another. Hot bedding, they called it. When one worker rose for the night shift, another arrived to take his place. No time for sheets to cool, no privacy, just rotation. And in the country, families often slept together, not from poverty alone, but from tradition. Generations in one cottage, grandparents in the corner bed, parents by the hearth, children in the loft, or nestled on mattresses made of straw. But there was love there, and laughter, and stillness, too. It's easy to romanticize the past, or to judge it, but within both luxury and lack, the human heart beat the same. Sleep touched all of them. A maid, rising at dawn, could feel the same peace in 5 minutes of stillness as her mistress did in 9 hours of uninterrupted rest. And tonight, as we lie in our own beds, with our own thoughts and layers and windows, humming with modern life, we remember that sleep is universal. But comfort is not. And to sleep well, without worry, without fear, is a gift. Not all were granted. So take a long breath, pull your own blanket close, and remember, you rest not just for yourself, but for all those who never could.